If you're 55, 75 years old, 9 things never share with anyone. There comes a time in life when wisdom speaks louder than words, and that time is now. If you're over 55, you already know that not everything is meant to be shared. The more people know about your personal life, the more opinions, judgments, and even manipulations creep in. Think about it. Have you ever shared something in confidence only to regret it later? Perhaps you mentioned your financial situation and suddenly people started treating you differently. Maybe you opened up about a personal struggle and it became the topic of whispers behind your back. In a world obsessed with oversharing, there's power in discretion. Some things, no matter how harmless they seem, should be kept to yourself. Not out of secrecy, but to protect your dignity, independence, and peace of mind. Today, I'm going to reveal 9 things you should never share with anyone. Mastering these secrets won't just shield you from unnecessary stress, it will empower you to live with confidence, strength, and quiet wisdom. Stay with me until the end, because once you understand these rules, you'll never see privacy the same way again. Let's dive in. 1. Your age. More than just a number. The Greek philosopher Plato once said, "Reality is created by the mind. We can change our reality by changing our mind." This wisdom applies deeply to how society perceives age. In ancient China, the sage Lao Tzu taught that the greatest strength is to flow with life, not resist it. Yet in modern times, age is seen as a barrier rather than a testament to resilience and wisdom. The Romans revered their elders, believing experience was the key to leadership and wisdom. But today, numbers dictate worth. Job applications, social status, even self-esteem. We are expected to define ourselves by a birth certificate rather than the stories we've lived. But does a number truly define a person, or is it the way we embrace life, no matter how many years have passed? I once knew a man named Samuel Whitaker. To the world, he was just another retired professor in his late 70s. But to those who knew him well, he was a man who refused to let numbers dictate his life. I met Samuel in a small cafe where he spent his mornings reading old philosophy books. His mind was sharp, his laughter rich, his presence magnetic. If you sat with him for even 5 minutes, you'd forget about his age, you'd only see his curiosity, wisdom, and passion for life. One day, a young woman approached him, asking how old he was. Samuel smiled and said, "I'm as old as the stories I've lived, and as young as the dreams I still chase." She laughed, assuming he was joking, but I knew what he meant. Samuel had spent his life watching people box themselves in by numbers. He'd seen brilliant minds turned away from jobs because they were too old. He'd watched once vibrant people stop chasing their dreams because society told them their time had passed. And he knew that once a person starts defining themselves by numbers, the world starts treating them like one. He told me a story from his own past. At 62, after a lifetime of teaching, he had wanted to pursue something new. He applied to an art school, a passion he had put aside in his youth. But when he arrived for his first class, he noticed something. Whispers, hesitant glances, young students wondering why an old man was sitting among them. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be judged not for his mind, but for the years behind him. A week later, he overheard one of his classmates say, "Why is he even here? Shouldn't he be enjoying retirement?" Samuel could have walked away. He could have let their assumptions define him. But instead, he chose to prove them wrong, not with words, but with action. He poured himself into his work, staying later than the youngest students, practicing endlessly. By the end of the semester, his paintings were some of the most praised. The same students who once questioned him now sought his advice, admiring his technique, seeing him not as an old man but as an artist. Years later, Samuel had a gallery of his own. And he often wondered, what if he had let that number stop him? What if he had accepted society's belief that age limits ability? Samuel once told me, "People will always measure you in numbers. But numbers can never measure the fire inside you." He never told anyone his real age again, not because he was ashamed of it, but because he knew people see what they expect to see. If they saw him as an old man, they would treat him like one. But if he kept them guessing, they would judge him by his actions, his words, his presence, not by a number. And that's the truth about age. It only matters if you let it. In today's world, where youth is idolized and age is often dismissed, Samuel's story is a powerful reminder. Ageism is real, but it only controls us if we accept its rules. So, ask yourself, do you want to be defined by a number or by the life you live? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been judged by your age, or have you, like Samuel, refused to let it define you? Let's talk. 2. Your finances. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." In ancient times, the wise understood that money itself is neither good nor evil. It is how we handle it that shapes our fate. Consider the story of Croesus, the legendary king of Lydia. He was known for his immense wealth, believing it made him invincible. But when he sought the oracle of Delphi, he was warned, "If you cross the river, a great empire will be destroyed." Croesus assumed the prophecy meant he would conquer, but he misunderstood. It was his own empire that fell, proving that wealth does not guarantee wisdom, security, or happiness. Even today, people judge each other by their bank accounts, but does money truly define a person? Or is it the way we carry ourselves, with or without it, that reveals our true worth? I once knew a man named Walter Green, and if you ever met him, you'd never guess he was a millionaire. Walter lived in a modest two-bedroom house, drove an old sedan, and wore the same comfortable sweater for years. He never spoke about money, never flashed wealth, never bragged about what he had. But those who paid attention saw the signs. He never worried about bills, he traveled without hesitation, and he always had enough to help others. But here's what made Walter different. He never let money define him. One day, a distant relative, a woman he had barely spoken to in years, called him out of the blue. She had heard rumors that Walter had done well for himself and suddenly wanted to reconnect. She poured her heart out about her financial struggles, subtly hinting that a loan from him could change everything. Walter listened patiently. He had helped many people in private, but he also understood the danger of mixing money with relationships. He had seen friendships ruined over debts, families torn apart by inheritance battles, and generosity mistaken for an open wallet. So, he told her something he had learned long ago. Money can fix a problem, but it can't fix a person. What you need isn't my money, it's a plan. If you want advice, I'll give it, but if you want cash, I can't help you. The conversation ended awkwardly, and they never spoke again. Walter's wisdom came from experience. In his younger years, he had been open about his finances, thinking that sharing success would inspire others. Instead, he found that wealth changed the way people treated him. Some envied him, some resented him, some wanted favors, loans, or investments. Few cared about Walter the person, only Walter the provider. He saw friends grow distant when he couldn't meet their financial expectations. He saw people smile at him not out of warmth but out of calculation. So he made a decision. He stopped talking about money. He still lived well. He still helped when he could. But he let people assume. Some thought he was struggling. Some thought he was comfortable. It didn't matter to him. What mattered was that he was treated like a person, not a bank. And in the end, it was the right choice. Walter died a wealthy man not just in money but in respect, peace, and dignity. His will quietly donated most of his fortune to charity, leaving behind a legacy not of wealth, but of wisdom. Walter taught me something I'll never forget. Money should be a tool, not a burden. If people only love you for it, you never had their love to begin with. In today's world where social media flaunts luxury, where people measure success by net worth rather than character, his lesson feels more relevant than ever. So tell me, have you ever experienced a change in how people treat you because of money? Have you seen relationships tested by financial expectations? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what truly defines a person. 3. Family secrets. The ancient sage Confucius once said, "The strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home." In every civilization, from the Greeks to the Chinese dynasties, the family was considered the foundation of society. Its secrets, struggles, and conflicts were never matters for the public. They were resolved within, quietly and respectfully. Consider the tale of the House of Medici, one of the most powerful families in history. Their wealth and influence shaped Renaissance Europe, but their greatest downfall came from betrayal within their own walls. A single whisper of internal conflict gave their enemies a way in, leading to their downfall from within rather than from without. The lesson? A family's strength lies not in its perfection but in its unity, even in imperfection. I knew a woman once. Her name was Margaret Turner, though everyone called her Maggie. Maggie was the kind of person who never missed a Sunday dinner with her children, who always had a pot of coffee ready for guests, and who could remember every detail about someone's life just from a single conversation. But despite her warmth, Maggie carried a heavy burden, one that only a few ever knew. Her son Daniel had struggled with addiction in his 20s. It was the kind of wound that rips through a family in silence, the kind of struggle that comes with shame, fear, and the constant worry of judgment from the outside world. Maggie never abandoned him, but she knew the world could be cruel, so she kept his battle private, choosing to protect his dignity rather than let gossip shape his story. One day at a family gathering, an old friend stopped by, someone Maggie had confided in during the hardest days. A well-meaning but loose-tongued woman, she casually mentioned in passing, "Oh, how's Daniel? I remember you told me about those difficult times." A cousin overheard, then an aunt. And within a few weeks, Daniel's past became a family discussion topic, even among those who never truly knew him. It wasn't long before Maggie saw the change, the sideways glances, the whispers at the dinner table. Even Daniel, who had been clean for years, felt the weight of their stares. He wasn't Daniel anymore. He was the one with the past. Maggie had thought confiding in a friend would lighten the burden, but instead, it turned a private struggle into a public judgment. One evening, after another uncomfortable family dinner, Daniel told her, "Mom, it's like I can never outgrow my mistakes, not because I haven't changed, but because people won't let me." That night, Maggie made a decision: no more sharing family struggles with outsiders. She realized that the world doesn't always offer understanding, it offers labels, and once a person is labeled, it's hard to break free. Then on, Maggie held her family's struggles close, handling them within the walls of their home, where compassion outweighed judgment and love stood stronger than gossip. Maggie's story isn't unique. Families all over the world experience conflict, pain, and regret, and sometimes the desire to share those struggles feels overwhelming. But the moment those whispers leave the walls of the home, they no longer belong to you, they belong to the world. Every family has its share of heartache and healing. But ask yourself, who deserves to hear your family's story? The world or the people who have lived it? Have you ever experienced the impact of sharing too much, or have you learned to guard the sanctuary of home? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about the strength found in family, even in its flaws. 4. Your medications. Health is personal. The Greek physician Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, once said, "Illnesses do not come upon us out of the blue, they are developed from small, daily sins against nature." The ancients believed that health was not just about the body but about the balance of the soul, mind, and spirit. In ancient Japan, samurai warriors followed the code of Bushido, which taught that showing physical weakness could invite enemies to attack. They believed that one's struggles, whether of the body or the mind, should not be paraded before the world, but handled with quiet dignity. Even today, society judges people by their health, energy, and vitality. But does a person become less because of a diagnosis, or do they remain just as whole, just as valuable, regardless of what happens inside their body? I once knew a woman named Eleanor Finch. She was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. Always smiling, always full of stories, always the first to help someone in need. If you saw her, you'd never guess that she carried a secret with her every single day. Eleanor had Parkinson's disease. She had known for years. But she never told anyone outside of her closest family. Not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't want to become Eleanor, the sick one. She wanted to be remembered as the woman who loved gardening, baked the best apple pie, and never let life's troubles steal her laughter. She had seen what happened to others when they spoke too soon about their health. She had watched her neighbor Harold struggle not just with his heart condition, but with the constant unsolicited advice from people who thought they knew better than his doctors. She had seen her old friend Martha, once a strong-willed woman, become pitiable in the eyes of others after revealing her cancer diagnosis, as if her identity had been stripped away, leaving only the disease. Eleanor didn't want that. One afternoon, a younger woman at church commented on how steady and graceful Eleanor always seemed, even at her age. Eleanor smiled and said, "I move at the pace life allows me, but I never let it dictate where I go." No one knew that behind closed doors she had good days and bad ones, that her hands sometimes trembled as she buttoned her blouse, that some mornings she sat on the edge of her bed, gathering the strength just to stand. But outside she lived. She never lied about her condition. If someone asked directly, she would tell them, but she never let it be the first thing people knew about her. Because she understood something that many don't. Once people see your illness first, they stop seeing you. Eleanor lived for many years after her diagnosis, and when she finally passed, people didn't talk about her illness. They talked about her kindness, her wisdom, her way of making people feel like they mattered. Her story made me think, how often do we allow our health to define us? How many of us have seen people treated differently, not because they changed, but because the world started looking at them through the lens of a diagnosis? Have you ever felt this in your own life, or seen it happen to someone else? Let's talk about it in the comments. What matters more, the conditions we carry, or the life we live despite them? 5. Your intimate life. Some things are sacred. The ancient Roman poet Ovid once wrote, "Love is a thing full of anxious fears, yet it brings supreme happiness." Even centuries ago, people understood that true intimacy is fragile. It thrives in the quiet spaces between two hearts, not in the eyes of the public. In the East, the philosopher Lao Tzu taught that a great relationship is like a well-kept garden. It flourishes with care, but if exposed too much, the world's winds can uproot it. The wisdom of the past tells us one thing: what is most sacred should be protected, not put on display. In today's world where people share their lives on social media, and personal moments become public conversations, has intimacy lost its sacredness? I knew a man named Frank Whitmore, a quiet, unassuming gentleman who had been married to his wife Lillian for over 50 years. Their love wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It wasn't grand public gestures or flowery words. It was in the way he placed her cup of tea just the way she liked it, in the way she touched his shoulder lightly as she passed, in the silence they shared on their porch, content just to exist together. When Frank was younger, his friends often laughed at him. "You never talk about your marriage, Frank," they'd tease. "What's the secret? What makes it last?" Frank would only smile and say, "The secret is that it's ours." He had learned early on that the more you invite the world into your love, the more you invite its opinions, its judgments, and its unwanted hands. He had seen other marriages suffer because of it, friends who turned their relationships into public debates, who sought validation from others rather than from their partners. He watched as private arguments became dinner-table discussions, as intimate moments became gossip, and as relationships fell apart, not because the love wasn't there, but because the world had been given too much space inside them. Frank and Lillian lived differently. They cherished their love quietly, guarding it like a flame against the wind. But there was one moment Frank never forgot, one that taught him just how sacred privacy was. One evening, at a family gathering, a relative jokingly asked Lillian, "Come on, Lil, tell us, what's Frank's biggest flaw?" Lillian just smiled and said, "That's between him and me." In that moment, Frank realized something. Lillian protected him the same way he protected her. She refused to let the world shape their love, judge it, or define it. Even in old age, as Lillian's memory faded and her body grew weaker, Frank never spoke of the struggles. To the world, they were the same old couple, still holding hands, still sitting on the porch. And when Lillian passed, Frank never shared the details of their final moments together. "Some things," he whispered one evening, "are too sacred for words." In a time when people share their relationships online for validation, when marriages become open topics for discussion, Frank and Lillian's story reminds us of something important. Love is not a performance, it's a sanctuary. So ask yourself, have you ever seen a relationship damaged by too many outside voices? Do you believe love is stronger when it's kept private? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the beauty of love that belongs only to two people and no one else. 6. Your charitable giving. The ancient philosopher Maimonides, one of the greatest Jewish sages, once described the highest form of charity as giving in a way that neither the giver nor the recipient knew each other. The best charity is that which is given in secret, expecting nothing in return. In ancient India, the concept of dayan, giving selflessly, was taught by sages. They believed that charity loses its purity when done for recognition. A gift should never be given to elevate the giver but to uplift the one in need. Today, in an era where generosity is often broadcast for likes and applause, has true giving lost its meaning? I knew a man named Edward Holloway. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't have noticed him. a quiet, unremarkable man in his late 70s, dressed in a worn-out brown coat. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, kept to himself, and never spoke much about his life. But there was something about Edward that very few people knew. For years, whenever someone in town fell on hard times, an unmarked envelope would appear in their mailbox. Inside would be just enough money to pay rent, buy food, or cover an unexpected bill. No letter, no name, just help, given silently. A single mother at the diner once found $500 slipped into her purse the day before her eviction notice took effect. A struggling mechanic, drowning in medical debt, opened his mailbox one morning to find an envelope with just enough cash to keep his shop open. No one knew where the money came from, but the kindness rippled through the town. A stranger, unseen but deeply felt, had been watching over them. It wasn't until Edward passed away that the town learned the truth. His small house was sold, and among his few belongings was a worn notebook, page after page listing names, dates, and small notes like, "Helped John's family after his accident, $300. Or, "Mary lost her husband, sent $250 for groceries." No one had ever known. He had given without seeking thanks, without waiting for recognition, without expecting applause. At his funeral, the church was filled with people who had never even met him but had been touched by his kindness. There were no grand speeches, no long-winded eulogies, just quiet tears and whispered gratitude for a man who had given everything but his name. Edward understood something that many forget. True giving is silent. In today's world, people announce their generosity for social approval. They take pictures of their charity, expecting praise. But when giving is done for attention, does it remain an act of selflessness? Edward's story reminds us that the best gifts are given not for the world to see, but for a heart in need to receive. So I ask you, have you ever witnessed a true act of silent generosity? Do you believe giving means more when done without recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the beauty of kindness that leaves no name, only impact. 7. Your accomplishment. The ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "He who speaks does not know, he who knows does not speak." True wisdom and accomplishment do not need to be declared, they are seen, felt, and recognized without a word. In ancient Rome, the greatest leaders were those who built legacies without seeking statues in their name. Take Cincinnatus, a humble farmer who was given absolute power to save Rome from invasion. Once victorious, he didn't boast or cling to his authority. He simply returned to his farm, believing that true leadership is measured by actions, not words. But today, in an era where achievements are often shouted louder than the deeds themselves, has humility become a forgotten virtue? I knew a man once. His name was Henry Dalton. To most, he was just an old mechanic, a man who spent his days fixing cars in a small garage on the outskirts of town. But there was something about Henry. People respected him, not because he demanded it, but because his presence alone commanded it. He never talked about himself, never sought admiration, but if you paid attention, you'd notice something. When the mayor's car broke down, it was Henry they called. When the local high school needed funding, an anonymous donation would always arrive, one they later traced back to Henry. One day, a young man named James came to Henry, eager and full of ambition. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "I want to be respected. I want people to know what I've accomplished. How do I make sure they see what I've done?" Henry simply wiped the grease from his hands and said, "If you have to tell them, you're doing it wrong." James frowned. "But shouldn't people know when you've done something great?" Henry chuckled. "Son, respect isn't about what you say, it's about what they remember. You ever hear me talk about my past?" James thought for a moment. Henry had been in town for over 40 years, yet never once had he boasted about his life. Later that evening, James did some digging. What he found stunned him. Before settling down in the garage, Henry had been one of the most skilled engineers in the country. He had helped design a breakthrough automotive technology that revolutionized safety in cars. His name had been in newspapers. He had once shaken hands with the president, yet not once had he ever mentioned it. James asked him about it the next day. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Henry just smiled. "Because what I've done isn't who I am. And if what I did was truly worth remembering, I wouldn't have to remind people." Henry's story has stayed with me for years. In a world where people rush to display their achievements, he understood a rare truth. True greatness is never loud, it's undeniable. Some spend their lives chasing recognition, but the ones who truly leave a mark, They let their actions speak long after they're gone. So tell me, have you ever known someone whose humility made them even greater? Or have you seen the difference between those who seek admiration and those who earn it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the quiet power of true accomplishment. 8. Past insults. The ancient Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." The wise have always understood that holding on to past insults does nothing but chain us to the very pain we wish to escape. In ancient Japan, samurai warriors were taught the art of letting go, for they believed that dwelling on grievances weakened the mind and distracted the soul. To seek revenge or cling to an insult was to hand power to the one who hurt you. Yet in today's world, where grudges are nurtured like treasures, have we forgotten that peace is found, not in remembering pain, but in releasing it? I once knew a man named Joseph Calloway. Joseph was the kind of man who carried the past with him everywhere he went. If you sat with him for long enough, he would tell you in vivid detail about the man who cheated him out of a business deal 40 years ago, or the childhood friend who betrayed him in high school. Each memory, each insult, he carried like stones in his pockets. One evening I saw him at the local cafe, staring out the window with a scowl on his face. I sat beside him, and before long the familiar stories began. "Do you know what he did to me?" he asked, voice sharp with bitterness. He was talking about his old business partner again, the same man he had spoken about 100 times before. I let him finish, then asked, "Tell me, Joseph, when did this happen?" 1978, he muttered. I paused, letting the silence settle between us. "So you mean to tell me," I said slowly, "that for over 40 years you've let this man live inside your head, rent-free?" Joseph looked at me, startled. He had never thought of it that way. "You're still paying the price for what he did," I continued, "not because of what happened back then, but because you keep carrying it today." That conversation stayed with Joseph. Days later he stopped me on the street. "I thought about what you said," he admitted. "And you're right. I've been carrying these grudges for so long, and for what? He moved on, I didn't." From that day forward, something changed. Joseph stopped repeating old stories of betrayal. He stopped feeding old wounds. And little by little, he became lighter. Joseph's story isn't unique. So many of us cling to old insults, reliving them over and over as if remembering them will undo the past. But bitterness is a thief. It steals peace, joy, and even the future. So I ask you, what past wounds are you still carrying, and what would happen if you finally let them go? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the power of freeing ourselves from the past. 9. Your personal beliefs. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know." True wisdom and conviction do not need validation from the world. They exist quietly, like the roots of a great tree, unseen but unshakable. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Socrates was sentenced to death for his beliefs. Yet in his final moments he did not argue, did not plead, he simply accepted his fate, knowing that true conviction does not require the approval of others. In today's world, where people argue endlessly over what is right, has the value of keeping our deepest beliefs private been forgotten? I knew a woman named Esther Wilkins, a quiet woman with a soul as steady as an oak tree. She was never the loudest voice in the room, never one to debate, yet there was a presence about her, a kind of peace that drew people in. People often wondered what gave her such strength. Some assumed it was faith, others believed it was wisdom, but if you ever asked Esther directly, she would simply smile and say, "Some things are best left unspoken." She had learned that lesson the hard way. As a young woman, she had once shared her deepest spiritual beliefs with a group of friends, thinking they would respect the convictions that guided her life. Instead, she was met with mockery, dismissive laughter, and endless debates. "How can you believe in something like that?" they asked. "That's just old-fashioned thinking," another scoffed. She had walked into that conversation with peace, and walked out feeling exposed and diminished. Not because she doubted herself, but because she realized something crucial. Some beliefs lose their power when thrown into the hands of others. Years passed, and Esther never spoke openly about her beliefs again, but if you watched her closely you could see them in the way she lived. She never preached about kindness, she simply lived it. She never argued about morality, she simply embodied it. She never defended her faith, because faith does not need defense. And something remarkable happened. While others spent their days trying to prove their beliefs to the world, Esther simply became a person people trusted, respected, and sought wisdom from. One day, a neighbor who had always been skeptical of faith came to her. He was facing a terrible loss, grief weighing on him like an anchor, and though he had once mocked her beliefs, he now sat beside her and whispered, "How do you stay so strong? What is it that gives you peace?" Esther smiled gently and said, "I've always known, I just never needed to convince anyone else." In today's world, people argue endlessly over philosophy, religion, and ideology, each person trying to prove that they are right and others are wrong. But true strength isn't found in shouting our beliefs, it's in living them. So tell me, have you ever had a belief that was challenged but you held on to it anyway? Do you think conviction is stronger in silence than in debate? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the power of unshakable, quiet belief. Life is a delicate balance between what we choose to share and what we hold close to our hearts. With time, we come to understand that privacy is not secrecy, it is wisdom. By keeping these 9 aspects of life private, you protect not only your dignity, but also your peace of mind. You free yourself from unnecessary opinions, judgments, and expectations, ensuring that your energy is spent where it truly matters, on living fully, joyfully, and on your own terms. Remember, you don't owe explanations to anyone. Your life is yours, and your story belongs to you. If you found this wisdom valuable, comment 1 below. Let me know that you're ready to protect your peace. If you feel differently, comment 0 and share your thoughts. Let's talk about it. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Let's build a community of strong, wise individuals who understand the quiet power of discretion. Thank you for watching. Take care, and guard your peace well.